Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome back to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we've been learning about the fundamentals of aviation insurance. And we've talked about aircraft insurance policies, and we've talked about aviation commercial general liability policies, the CGL. We talked about a list of exclusions and how a lot of those exclusions are there because the exposures for the risks related to those exclusions are better insured somewhere else. In our most recent episode, we talked about employment practices liability insurance and how it's typically bought alongside a directors and officers liability insurance policy. Not always, but frequently. And so today we wanted to talk about that directors and officers liability insurance. According to the Insurance Risk Management Institute, directors and officers liability insurance, and we call it D&O for short, is a type of liability insurance covering directors and officers of an organization for claims made against them while serving on a board of directors and or as an officer, right, of that organization. So it can cover directors and officers of for-profit businesses, privately held organizations, not-for-profit groups, and educational institutions. And as IRMI said, it functions as a management errors and omissions liability policy. So a management E&O errors and omissions liability policy. And again, it covers claims related to managerial decisions that have adverse consequences. Again, this is not a bodily injury and property damage typically. It is typically a monetary damage. Again, bodily injury and property damage is either workers' compensation related or aviation commercial general liability related. So this is management errors that lead to some sort of financial loss. Again, there are some unique provisions that are different from the aviation, aircraft, and commercial general liability forms. We talked about them in our recent episode with employment practices liability, but the policies are on a claims made basis. Aircraft and aviation CGL policies are an occurrence, meaning the occurrence happened during this policy period. Even if the claim's not made till the next policy period or until the next year when the policy is expired, the policy still responds to when the occurrence happened. When it comes to the directors and officers, EPLI, it is when the claim is made. So coverage has to be in effect when the claim is made against the insured. So that is a big difference. And again, the defense costs are inside the limits of liability. We talked about aircraft and aviation CGL. Typically, you have the limits of liability and then a separate legal defense, which does not affect the limits of liability. Well, in directors and officers and the employment practices liability, the defense costs actually reduce or shrink the limits of liability available for an award. That's called the shrinking limits provision. So if you have $1 million policy and it costs $750,000 to defend up before the trial, you only have $250,000 of limit left. So it's important to buy a limit that contemplates a defense cost in addition to potential awards. And again, it covers monetary damages. Typically, it could exclude bodily injury and property damage altogether. And although, again, just like with the employment practices liability, this can be purchased as a standalone policy. It's frequently sold as a part of a management liability package policy, which in addition to providing the D&O coverage also provides some fiduciary liability insurance and often that option to combine it with the employment practices liability insurance. So that's all for this week. Join us next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerosinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer. These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.